2666 is the best book I've ever read, and it's not even close. In fact, it's a book that means a lot to me personally. And before talking a little bit about the structure of the book, I will tell you my story about it. So I grew up in Mexico, but I did my 4 years of college in Burlington, Vermont, and there's not really many Spanish speakers there. So it's something I definitely miss dearly. And I decided to read in Spanish a little more in order to just keep that sort of connection with my language besides just calling family and friends. I had a few books I had bought here and there and ordered, but one day I was actually walking through a used bookstore and I saw just this one book in Spanish that was at the end of the other languages section, and that was 2666. I didn't have any idea about this book or who Roberto Bolaño was. I simply saw the sheer magnitude of this book, the sheer page count, and I was a little intimidated and very curious. And I read the back of the book, and I was very hooked. I wanted to know what this was about, what all 5 parts did. And I calculated based on how many days I had left in my very last semester of college versus the pages left in the book, how many I would have to read a day to finish it before leaving college. It was about 40 pages a day, which would be a challenge, but it would be something that I was more than willing to take. So I left with that book. And I started reading it, and I was immediately hooked. And I kind of smashed through that 40 pages a day goal. Honestly, I finished it maybe a month early because it was just that good. What Bolaño does that is super interesting is for many of his novels, such as 2666, but also Nazi literature in the Americas and even in The Savage Detectives, is he creates a literary corpus that is fictional, but makes the world feel so alive. And you have people that are passionate about these kinds of poems, literature, etc., who just feel so relatable because there's people you've met like that. And the way it's all interconnected is just so beautiful. It reminds me so much of the authors of the Latin America boom, and he is a little closer to that generation, of course, even though his books came later on, but it just gives you such a different blend of it that is a little more grounded. Bolaño is a very complex person, born in Chile, but also grew up in a large part in Mexico and did a lot of his professional life there, and also eventually had his children in Spain. So very interesting international person, of course, very well read. And that was really cool because you get all sorts of points of view that are very well informed all about Europe, all about different parts of Latin America. But really his vivid descriptions of this fictional city in Mexico, Santa Teresa, is what really shook me to the core. Because having grown up in Mexico, it was like being taken back home, the way everything was described. That includes the good and the bad. You know, it includes vivid descriptions of a beautiful plaza with a church in the middle and whatnot, which is basically every little tiny town that you go to visit on vacation, or just the way the streets are structured and the different neighborhoods where you can really picture yourself there if you know how Mexican city is usually structured. But also there's the 4th part of the book called the part of the crimes, where these horrible crimes that happen against women are described in a very sort of non-emotional, excruciating detail. And this goes on for hundreds and hundreds of pages. And yet you simply cannot stop reading. You get some insight into what the police does and how it addresses it, such as blaming other people who committed other crimes and being like, yeah, they totally also got rid of these women in the process, which mirrors reality a little too much. And Mexico is one of the countries with the most feminicides happening, to the point that many Mexicans pretty much at least know a victim of a crime like that. In some way, this whole part gives a voice to all the disappeared, and those disappeared fluctuate in numbers because then the way we're counting them changes every single period, really. There used to be hundreds of thousands. Apparently there's less right now, but that's really because the government changed the way it counts, not really because there's less disappeared people. And this book shows a little microcosm of that, where things just kind of happen and the authorities are none the wiser, just like in real life. And yet the people who find themselves in these cities where horrible things are happening have such beautiful, intricate lives, you know, and that shows that every person is a story and every person has their passions, every person has their complexities. Be it the scholars in the very first part who are fascinated with the literary corpus of this fake author called Benno von Archimboldi, and they end up in Mexico in their search for him and what he represents. Be it the Mexican scholar that they meet in this fictional city and his daughter and the struggle that he has gone through finding a sense of belonging and raising his daughter in such a horrible place. Be it Fate, the American boxer that visits for a boxing match that wasn't really his passion and ends up intersecting with the daughter of the scholar in the previous part. Be it every person from every crime who had a job, who had a family, even in this fictional world, which mirrors everyone who is a victim of a crime in real life, who has a job, who has a family, who has a story. Or be it the final part, which talks about the life of the person who actually is Benno von Archimboldi and actually brings it all together in the end. It is such a beautiful and intricately told story that really shows you the value of all these individual experiences and yet touches on so many real things with such sensibility. I even met a person once in the Spanish department of a local university who read this book and it changed her life. And now she works for women's advocacy groups in Mexico. So it's not only me that this amazing book has changed the life of, and I still think about it so often, even though it's been 5 years since I first read it, and I've only really read a few excerpts since then, but I just can't stop thinking about it. And it's not really easy to recommend because the subject matter isn't the happiest, especially once you get to the largest part where all the crimes are described. And of course, giving someone a gargantuan book of about 1,300 pages isn't the easiest ask, especially knowing that everyone is busy. But that's why if you happen to find yourself in this video, I would highly recommend you try it out, just because you may find deeper meaning in here. So thank you, Roberto Bolaño, for taking me home in 2666 with everything good and bad about it. And perhaps reminding me that since I left, I've never been the same, and perhaps that's okay. Because just like everyone else, I have my own story. Thanks for watching.